also did different studies on evaluating the efficacy of fluid resuscitation and helped in the guidelines of severely malnourished children. Since then, he has been based in critical care research in Australia as an echocardiography research fellow. His PhD focuses on evaluating dysfunction of the heart during infection and the response to drip fluid treatment. Dr. Obonyo is interested in heart research because he has this very key insight. He believes that children with healthy hearts make for the best footballers, and they endure physical exercise and play with a good heart. No yellow cards, no red cards. So he does have interest in soccer, and you can message him about that. So Dr. Obonyo, you are welcome to take over.
Great, thanks, Shana. I hope I can get my video in my screen. That's my video, and get to share my screen as well. You can all see the screen, yeah?
I think it's just loading up.
Oops, let's just see. Share.
It's starting. Yes, we can see it.
Right, perfect. Okay, great. Thanks very much, Chana, for that introduction, and thanks to the organizers for inviting me to talk about this grants in health research. I also really happy to share this platform with my esteemed colleague, Dr. Paul Yonga, who we went through good times as undergraduates, trying to hustle for grants to do research and organize conferences. I know Paul is somewhere along the way, but he'll be joining us as we go along. So I'll speak for about 20 minutes and then give a brief introduction and then hand you over to Paul. We'll talk about, finish off for another 20 minutes, and you can have a discussion at the end. And as Chana said, I think it's better to have questions coming into the chat box as we we get through the presentations within the prescribed time. So to get us started, some of the discussion points we'll talk about are those, what's a proposal, how it's a grant, how is it different, and opportunities just as the organizers have requested. So probably to start us off with the last bit, is it common practice for more advanced researchers to mentor undergraduates as part of their grant? So while I was preparing for this webinar, one of the things I did was just look through my archives in medical school, and this popped up actually, and I decided to start us off from here. So it gives me great pleasure, and I must congratulate and commend the organizers for, I have been down there organizing these things, and I know how much it entails and how much work it is aside from the grueling schedule of medical school. On the left here, I have, on the right here, I have the first constitution that we wrote up from MSAKE. This was way back in 2008 when we promulgated our constitution. And then a year later, we hosted, we had the first MSAKE hosted conference in Moi University in Eldoret. Again, related to the subject of grants, it gives me great pleasure to be able to talk about grants and funding because I happened to of MSAKE. So the very first check that came through to support MSAKE, I was the one who was managing it. It was a check from Sang Pharma of 20,000 shillings. This is just probably familiar faces you might have there. Dr. Roy, probably Professor Mabea now in Moi University about grants. I think in a very real sense, grants form the axis around which the research world rotates. If we are to think about it, it's probably a chicken and egg kind of situation. I mean, research priorities tend to determine the funding level that comes through, and available funding also influences what priorities are set for research, unfortunately. For example, if we were to just use the current pandemic as an example, there are people who are doing research on coronavirus probably for a good 20 or so years, even before the first SARS and MERS outbreaks happened. But then they probably were looking at different things, you know, the structure of the virus and how it evades the immune system and those kinds of things. But then research priorities tend to shift with increased funding. I mean, right now, if you are working on coronavirus and you're not helping to develop vaccine, then you probably will not access much funding. That is just to show you how both, priority and funding tends to be interrelated in this research world. If talking about a grant, what exactly is a grant? It basically is an application. It's an application for money. So the way I like to think about it is, when you're writing a grant application, think of yourself as telling a story. To put there in the slide, bank manager, right? Telling your bank manager a story and asking them for money. I need money to do CD, and you need to be very convinced in your application as trustworthy, show that you can be trusted. And what's really important, again, with grant funding, to show that you've had a bit of track record with handling some of these things. So participating in some of these organizations, I know FAMSA does quite a bit of this. I've seen you have a platform for publishing as medical students. Some of these things you do to build your individual profile go a long way in helping you to when you come to applying and writing up grant applications. Why should we write grants? Yes, main reason of writing grants is to obtain funding. And the purpose of the funding can be different. They just put a list there that shows us different types of grants. You could be, to establish a research program, that would be a program grant. To fund a project, that's a project grant. To host an event, usually conference grants. And to, for training and capacity development, those are training grants. We also have attending meetings and all that, that's travel grants usually. And for your own research and salary support, we normally refer to those as personal fellowships or personal grants. So selecting a grant to apply for, first of all, the important thing is it's determined, first of all, by the purpose. So again, just back to the slide that we've been through, you first of all need to very clearly identify the purpose, because what you write in a travel grant is very different from what you're going to write in a conference grant or a program grant, for example. So the purpose is the first starting point that determines how you select or what you want to achieve with your grant application. The other important thing is eligibility. So grants or funding bodies will normally have eligibility criteria to tell you what they want to pay or put money into. They'll tell you the scope of funding, they'll tell you the specific criteria. And then, most of the grant funding in the world is controlled from the West. So there usually, you'd have different criteria for different geographic locations. So you need to be very mindful when you're looking out at these grants. There's absolutely no point in applying or attempting to apply for a grant in which you don't meet the eligibility criteria. You could use those or look at those so that you just have more experience or information about what goes into grant funding, but you should not really waste time applying for grants that you're not eligible for. And I'll talk a bit more about this down in the slides. The other important thing to be mindful about is a deadline. This is a deadline for the grant application. So normally the funders will tell you submit your application by a certain date, a certain time. So that's really important to be mindful about, because it makes it very easy for the reviewers. If you don't meet the deadline, they don't even get to look at your very nice idea. Your grant just doesn't get looked at because it didn't make the deadline for the application. The other thing is the timeline. So normally funding will be awarded for a certain timeline, and this is for project grants. You'll be told that this funding is available for a duration of 1 year, 2 years. So when you're writing up your grant application, you need to be sure that, or be mindful of those timelines, and also ensure that you're aligning your grant application to the timelines that the funders stipulate. Talk about grant writing. So I said it's a conversation to your bank manager. It's a very formal application. So the language you use in there is official. I like to think of it when you're writing a grant, the best advice is for you to put yourself in the shoes of the funder or the funding agency. Like, think about it as you write. Think of what you're writing from the perspective of the reviewer or the reader, and you know, it's a two-way street. You want to show that you're providing value, or you're bringing value to the table, and you're also addressing whatever the funder is considering valuable or worth funding. So some of the questions I just put there are a bit rhetoric, to just ask yourself as you're writing your grant application: is this relevant? Is there necessary infrastructure to deliver this output? Is it achievable? And even if you do this, I mean, who really cares? And if you find XYZ, so what does this mean? Isn't this already known? Are there easier ways or more cost-effective ways of achieving this? And these are very important questions, because grant funding is very limited and people budgets are very tight, and so they're not putting money just superfluously. It has to be for a very specific and good reason that you know, grant funding is awarded. And finally, down there, you want to answer the question, why you? I mean, it's a very competitive world in this you know, science and in the grant funding space, and so you need to sell yourself in a way, assuming you're going into a pool of, you know, I don't know how many applicants there normally would be, but you want to stand out from the crowd and win the grant that you're applying for. Success in grant writing, there's really no substitute to wide reading. So grants will involve, especially, you know, research grants, you need to read and write widely, be in touch with your subject, know the gaps in knowledge in the field that you want to address. And then reading will also help you know what opportunities are available for you. And then the process is all about writing, scientific writing. So it's always good to just get into the habit of practicing scientific writing. You know, that's why I talked about the journal that you people have as students. Is a good place to practice your writing. And I had the organizers say that you actually do that, publishing there free of charge. Most journals in science would charge you to put your content in there. The thing is, practice makes perfect. So look at sample grant forms. I think I have one in the next slide. Make sure you know the requirements of the application before you start and plan ahead. Most of them will require you maybe to attach, for example, a letter from your head of department. Of course, the grant funding will not be awarded for you to go and do the research in your home. So you won't need to be attached to an institution, and most of it would be, you know, either a research institution such as a medical research institution here in Kenya, or a university institution commonly. So you need to plan ahead. If you want a letter of support from your institution, you need to ask for this way ahead before the funding deadline, rather than trying to run at the last minute to collect and gather these documents. You also need to know the culture or the focus of the funder, know the assessment criteria that they use. And I put there in red, really important, you need to follow the instructions. All grant applications will have a set of instructions that you have to adhere to. So keep to word limits. If they tell you the title should not be more than 5 words or more than 40 characters, if you go more than 40 characters in your title, then they won't even get to read the rest of the grant. They just, you know, don't say you didn't follow instructions and they don't look at it. So follow instructions, submit all the required documents. We've already talked about letters of, you know, endorsement from your department and all that, and within the deadline. Of course, if you don't meet the deadline, then your grant funding doesn't get looked at. This is just an example of a first page of an application. You'll have a title over there, the duration of funding that you're applying for. This one was for a master's training research that I put here. And then your submission should be, you know, within 6 months before the proposed date. So when you're filling in these kinds of things, you need to make sure that you actually read the question again, and the answer that you put in there addresses and meets whatever the application requires of you. Of course, applications will require you to have an administering institution, a department, and an organization, and that kind of thing. This is just a sample first page, and I'll refer you to some pages on the Welcome Trust, which is what I have commonly experienced in my life, and I'm going to borrow heavily over the next couple of slides from the Wellcome Trust grant websites. This information is available for free on their website, which is up there. They have information on how to develop your research career, starting from your undergraduate education through to postgraduate training into postdoctoral research and leading a research program. I really like the way they put arrows showing that this is a very linear process or transition. There's quite a bit of ups and downs in the research world in each of these stages that require you to come up with, prospective planning, because applying for grants doesn't mean that you apply, you'll get it. They're very competitive. There is a lot of rejections that happen, and it's not just with the grants, it's basically the way science works. You write up your research, send it to for publication, gets rejected, gets thrown back at you. So that this process, in as much as the arrows are very linear there, it's a very tortuous and convoluted process as you move through. Again, I know you're mainly, within your undergraduate remit of training. I put this as an example of what is on offer for international master's fellowships, because you don't want to get to the level of master's and then start thinking of what should I do. I'll use this as an example so that as you prepare to apply for such funding, there are certain things you can put in place today for yourselves that will make it easier and make you more competitive for these kinds of funding. So if you look at this International Master's Fellowship on the Wellcome Trust website, it says your career stage, it will be for postgraduate because it's a master's. Where is your host institution? Of course, it applies to low, middle income countries. Type of researcher, basic, clinical, or public health. And you can see the level of funding that is available. That's about slightly over 12 million Kenya shillings if you have to convert it, and it pays for a stipend, fees for your master's, and it covers a duration of 30 months. And in the website, you'll have other information on eligibility, how to apply. The important thing, of course, they put there that we've already highlighted is the key dates and when you expect to get your decision. Down there, they also have a section on grants awarded, which I'd really encourage people interested in applying for grants to also look at. It's really important to have a feel of what funders generally tend to fund, and they have a section that they summarize. Onto the eligibility again, you have to make sure you read through the criteria. This is just walking you through that international fellowship, and you're the national of a middle income country, your research is within the priorities there, and your sponsorship is from an eligible institution, and you could be either clinical or non-clinical undergraduate. So by the time you are finishing your undergraduate, you should be at a level where you're comfortable to apply for this grant. Later on in the talk, I'm going to just highlight some things on the research proposal, because as you apply for a grant, you'll have to specify what exactly you're going to use the money for. What is on offer? Again, this is just blowing things up so that it's much clearer. They tell you they offer an international master's fellowship. They tell the first 12 months you'll be doing a Master of Science course. And this is important to highlight. A good postgraduate education is not cheap. It doesn't come cheap. It tends to be fairly expensive. And so some of these opportunities are very good, important for you to start thinking about as early as at your undergraduate level. And then they give you for another 18 months for your research projects. And that's a kind of pot of money that they're talking about. And it covers your stipend, travel costs, and tuition for your master's. Over there, we've talked about the support. The reason I put this here is also on the website, they have a sample full application form. So it's good for you to just log on to that Wellcome Trust website, download that application form, and have a look at what the application requires. And then also read through some of the stories by career and research careers of people who've done it before. It's a very good website that puts together a lot of information on how to apply for grant funding. And they also give you guidelines on how to apply for a grant, again, on that website. Like I said, there's really no substitute to wide reading and practicing writing. There can be all these types of tips that out there, but you have to get in, roll up your sleeves and get yourself into it to experience it. So before you start writing, you need to know that the purpose of the grant. Remember from the first slide, are you applying for a travel grant? Are you applying for a research grant? Check you're eligible, gather all the information that you need, and then talk about your research proposal. the project or event you're applying for. Is it the importance of the question and how to articulate it, do a thorough literature review on the background, feasibility, is this achievable, and collaborations. Research is all about collaboration. Most of the time you can't achieve everything you set out within by yourself, so you need to find people to collaborate with. For travel grants, you'll mainly get people wanting to fund you to go and present to meetings, either to make an oral or poster presentation, you'll be presenting your research findings. One of the things that I just added in there is most applications for grants will require you to have a CV or a personal statement. Most people tend to just have a generic one and copy and paste from probably previous applications. You need to make sure that your personal statement is tailored to address the specific needs of that grant, be it a travel grant or a project grant. So the project grant, so when you're writing a grant, you'll be expected to articulate what you're going to use the money for. And for a project grant, you'll have a title, the hypothesis for your study, or what is it that you want to study, the objectives, or this need to be very clear, what you aim to achieve, the context of your hypothesis. You need a background that is very clear, coherent, compelling, and that's what makes you competitive. Again, justification, like I told you, funding is limited for research and for many other things. So you need to justify, why is this important to do? Justify your project in a way that is, we use research funders mainly use a SMART acronym for specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. Of course, time-bound is really important because budgets are, they just don't run endlessly. They have to be within certain timelines. And of course, there has to be justification for everything that you put in the budget. Methodology, again, needs to be linked to your objectives. How are you going to achieve your objectives? So when you're writing your methodology section, you always need to be making reference to the objectives. I set out to do A, I'll use method 1 to achieve objective A. I set out to do B, I'll use method 2 to achieve objective B. That kind of thing. And then with research, of course, you're venturing into the unknown, but most grant applications will want you to have a feel of what you find and expect or anticipate to find, and the significance of this. This is not to say that you should always go out and find what you had anticipated. In fact, research by what it is, its nature, you can end up coming up with findings that are completely opposite to what you had anticipated. But for the purposes of grant application, most of the funders will require you to put anticipated findings there. And it just shows you how logical you're thinking through your hypothesis, and what, if you follow through this process, whether your hypothesis can lead you to your anticipated findings. Significance there, research is about generating new knowledge, and these are some of the abbreviations that I use: knowledge mobilization, translation, and how you're going to disseminate it. That's through the publication. In this part of the world, career paths are not very well defined, in our setting for clinical academics and clinical research. In the West, I've just borrowed this slide from the NIH. The career pathways are a bit more well defined. So if you're, in basic science and you just want to do research, so you start with college, go to graduate school, and you can filter out either going to regulation, policy, communication, or advance into postdoctoral research and have a career as a scientist and with teaching responsibilities, or go into the lab and just be involved in biotech. For medical trainees, again, the same pathways is a bit well defined in the West. If you're just interested in doing research and seeing patients mainly within a hospital setting, the green would be your pathway. And if you want to be, a physician who also actively engages in research, spending more time doing or answering questions, and this would be the pathway. Again, you start going to college, medical school, doing residency or fellowship, and then into early faculty, and then you start your career as a research physician. The difference between these two guys is this guy will be doing research and spending most of the time seeing patients in hospital, while this guy will be doing research, seeing patients, but spending more time in a research institution. I'm now going to switch gears, mindful of time, to just highlight some opportunities that exist. It's a bit unfortunate with the research world and the level of competition. the funding opportunities that are there for undergraduate level tend to be very limited. Most funding will be for postgraduate fellowship or postgraduate level of training. That is not to say that there are no opportunities. I'll show you a few examples down of funding opportunities available at undergraduate level. But you want, as you're doing all this, you want to be preparing or priming yourself for bigger funding, and building your profile is really important. Building your CV for bigger grant applications, bigger funding applications is really important. So this is just an example of a website that has funding opportunities for those in Kenya. There is also the L'Oreal that tends to give fellowships to women, looking mainly at sub-Saharan Africa, young talents. Again, it says 15 endowments and 5 for postdoctoral. Again, this is at postdoctoral level type of funding. Another example I have here is travel grants. So I've been a beneficiary of the International Brain Research Organization travel grants during my undergraduate training, and they do have very generous packages to enable you attend meetings. Part of what we do at the University of Nairobi, I'm not sure in these other universities, if it happens, we have an opportunity to intercalate a year of research during our medical training. And during that time, you can spend, a good 12 months of doing a research project. And depending on your area of interest, whether it's neuroscience, IBRO will tend to fund a lot more things that are neuroscience related, but there would be other organizations that tend to fund disciplines that are aligned with them. And of course, every application has its own deadlines. Author Aid, this is probably the last example I want to put up here. This is a very nice platform that provides online learning. Some of the generic skills that you'll need to survive as a researcher and for grant applications are available on this platform, and this can help you build your profile. I've just summarized a few links that you can use as undergraduates. I'll probably share these slides with the organizers to send to you that you can use and look at. So there are courses that can give you, training on good clinical practice, good laboratory practice, ethics in research. And these are summarized over there in some of the open grants at IBRO, like I said. I did put at the bottom there a link to the Khemri Wellcome Trust website, which I think this is just what it looks like when you click onto it. And it shows some of the training opportunities that are available. And you can see it covers a whole, the whole discipline or journey, whether it's a medical elective, a master's training, a postgraduate diploma, or PhD or postdoctoral training. So these are some opportunities that it's good to be aware that they're there. The beauty of this, the one at Khemri, it gives you an option of creating an account on the website and uploading or updating your profile there. And periodically you get to check when some of these things get opened up and advertised. I'm mindful about time, and I want to just summarize and let Paul take over. The thing that I want to highlight in the end is grant process is not easy. And like I said, there's quite a bit of rejections that you have to deal with in science. You put in all this work, collect all this information, spend sleepless nights putting together a 50-page grant application. And then this is just an example of what I got. This was on 27th of May, 2015. This was an response I got for one of my grant applications. After careful consideration of your application, I regret to inform you that you've not been selected for further consideration. This is not unusual in the research world, in grant applications, even in publications. It's the nature of science. You pick yourself up, prepare the next application and send it out. The way science works tends to be very competitive, and you need to get used to the fact that rejection is good part of science. I want to end here and hand over the meeting to Paul and look forward to a discussion at the end. What people see, is very different from the sacrifices, the tears, the rejections and sleepless nights that you need to put in for successful grant applications. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Obonyo, for that wonderful presentation and for taking us through a step-to-step process and also giving examples and opportunities for that. Really admire your journey and we wish you the best. So we were supposed to have a small icebreaker, but because of time, I think we can skip it. I can just go forward and introduce Dr. Yonga. I can see him in the room. So I'll just introduce him and just share my screen for a second. Okay, I hope the slide is up. Yes, so our next speaker is Dr. Paul Yonga. Dr. Yonga is a consultant in infectious diseases and tropical or travel medicine. Travel medicine. So as well as being a consultant in these aspects, he's also a clinical epidemiologist and high resolution anoscopist. He received his medical degree in 2012 from Kampala International University in Uganda and did his postgraduate training in general or internal medicine and geriatric medicine from the Royal College of Physicians of Edinburgh in England, and later trained in infectious disease and tropical medicine in both British Columbia Center for Excellence in HIV/AIDS, which is in Vancouver, Canada, and the Institute of Tropical Medicine in Antwerp, Belgium. So he holds a Master of Science in Public Health with a focus of tropical medicine and international health, as well as an advanced training in qualitative research methods from the Center for International Health University of Norway, and clinical epidemiology from Utrecht University in Netherlands. So you can see he's just got all over. He has also trained as a high resolution anoscopist under the International Anal Neoplasia Society at the Academic Medical Center, which is in University of Amsterdam, Netherlands, and as a travel medicine specialist at the University of Witwatersrand, which is now in South Africa. So he currently is associated with several hospitals, including Fountain Hospital, which I can relate to being in the town where my university is. And his major passion is in training and mentoring upcoming clinical investigations in infectious diseases, tropical medicine, research, projects, such forums, and the likes. So with that to say, I will stop sharing my screen and I will welcome Dr. Yonga. Dr. Yonga, are you are able to? You can just switch on your video and your mic right now. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much for that very kind introduction. I hope you can all hear me. I'm very sorry. I'm actually on the road. I'm actually just on my way back to Nairobi from Mombasa, and I'm in a town where my internet connectivity is not really the best. So the moment I switch on my video, I'll literally get off. I think my voice will be breaking up quite a bit. So just give me a heads up if my voice is clear right now.
Sure thing, no problem.
Thanks.
You're good to go, Paul. Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you. Yeah. So thank you so much, Nchafatso, for that very wonderful discussion. I actually just switched on the voice so that when I was talking, I could just listen to your presentation all the way, and I could literally associate with everything you said. One of the things that I would probably want to discuss quite quickly is number one, probably over the next 10-15 minutes, is really to really practicalize what Nchafatso has really spoken about very eloquently and in much detail. So what I'll just be speaking about is really what has been my experience and the first grant that I actually got along the way. So I got my first grant in 2009, and it was a travel grant. At that time, I was a fourth-year medical student in Uganda. And what literally happened is that when I joined medical school in 2005 at Kampala International University in Uganda, I actually joined. I was this very enthusiastic medical student, having come from a background where I grew, and my uncle is actually a cardiologist. And so he's someone who's actually been in the research world for quite a bit. And he's someone who at that point used to travel quite a lot. Right now he's trying to relax a bit, but during those days he used to travel quite a bit, traveling for conferences and all that. And so during that time, I was still very young. And so when I used to see some of those experiences that she was going through, in my head, I was actually quite excited. And I was like, yeah, I'm someone who I actually want to grow up to be like him. I want to travel. I want to do what he's doing. In fact, that was the main motivation for me to becoming a doctor, because he would actually come to the house and say that, no, I'm going to Brazil for a conference. I'm going to South Africa for a conference. I mean, that life was very exciting, but ideally I did not really know what exactly I was going to do there. And so when I joined medical school in 2005, one of our lecturers, I remember that time we were doing a course in communication skills. And he's during the lecture at some point, he just mentioned, supposing one of you is selected to travel to present a paper at a conference in Lagos, Nigeria. How would you feel? You need to communicate effectively. So of course, everyone in the class was very excited that, yeah, I mean, people want to present papers in Lagos. But of course, for me in my head, I was like, yes, that is something that will be very exciting. But number one, is it something that I can do when I'm an undergraduate medical student, or do I have to wait all the way to become a medical doctor for me to start presenting some of these papers? Of course, that thought just ended there in that class, and that was just in 2005. And so 2 years passed. That was 2005, then 2006. Now in 2007, I was seated with some of my colleagues having dinner in the dining hall just before we went for preps in the library. And as I was going through the newspapers, I saw an advertisement by Mulago Hospital. That's the equivalent of Kenyatta National Hospital in Uganda. So there was an advertisement by Mulago Hospital and the College of Health Sciences of Makerere University, where they are advertising for a scientific conference that was to take place in Kampala. So for some of you who may know the terrain of Uganda is that Kampala International University has a campus in Kampala, really in Kampala, and then the medical school is in the western part of Uganda towards the border with Rwanda. And so it's about 6 hours from Kampala. And so when I saw this advertisement, I told my colleagues, I want to go for this conference. I literally have to go for this conference. At that time, and when they made this advertisement, they said that, we need to write an abstract. That time I was in second year going to third year. So I can tell you, I did not know what an abstract was. When they were talking about introduction, methods, results, I did not know what that was. But I was like, I need to write something for this, just to get a foothold in this conference. And so my friends at that time were like, you're just in second year. You should not bother yourself going for this conference. We are preparing for anatomy exams and physiology. I know I'm speaking to a lot of you. I'm sure most of you have been through the preclinical years, the anatomy, physiology, biochemistry. Those are not very easy years because you can easily flunk such exams. But you see, for me at that time, I think the motivation was really to attend this conference, and also just make sure that I see how some of these things get along. So the long and short of it is that when we went to the library, when my friends were going to study for the anatomy physiology exams, I was literally going to look for a topic on what to write as an abstract. So I went into the library and opened up a microbiology textbook. And the first thing that hit my eyes was the common cold. I'm sure right now a lot of us are dealing with coronaviruses, and you should know that the common cold, the rhinovirus, which causes the common cold, is one of the classes of the coronaviruses. So that's the first thing that hit my eyes. And I started writing something sketchy about the common cold. In fact, my topic at that time was the seriousness of the common cold in East Africa. Now, when I sit back and look back at that topic, I literally just laugh because I'm sure that's a topic that can never be accepted anywhere. But to be honest, that's the topic that literally drove my research career to this point, in addition to being in active clinical practice as an infectious disease physician. So I wrote my abstracts, I wrote the introduction, I wrote the methods, the results, the conclusion. Literally, I didn't know what I was writing, but I wrote it. And then the next morning, I went to the computer lab and submitted it. Then after, I think about a month, I got a response back from the conference organizers. Of course, the paper was rejected, just as Nchafatso had said. Be ready for such rejections when you start out your career. So that was my first rejection. Of course, I was very demoralized. But at the end of that email, the organizer had the person who wrote to me that email was that, now that you're a third year, now that you're a second year medical student and you've actually bothered to write a research abstract, we will waive your registration fees. So you do not have to pay registration fees for this conference. So you can just come and attend the conference, but be ready to foot your accommodation and of course your transport between your accommodation and the conference venue, which for me was okay. It wasn't really a bother. So I told my dad about it, and my dad sent me some money for transport from Bushenyi, where I was in Western Uganda, to Kampala to attend the conference. And it was a very nice 5-star hotel. And that's the time now I started reading the abstract books of people who had submitted abstracts for the conference. Now, when you look at the abstracts, most of the people who are presenting were people who had just cleared the residency programs in pediatrics, in internal medicine, in surgery. And what they were presenting were really what they had done as part of their thesis and dissertations in partial fulfillment of their masters. So when I looked through it, I was like, okay, so this is how abstracts are actually written. Abstracts are actually written after you've done research. Not just sitting down somewhere and writing something abstract. You literally have to do some form of research for you to present an abstract. So that was my first learning point, of course, just along the journey. Now, after that conference, the next conference I had was organized by the Makerere University Medical Students Association, where I presented the same abstract. That is the seriousness of the common cold in East Africa. But this time around, what I decided to do was really to make sure that I strictly adhered to the guidelines of what I'd learned from the first conference that I had attended. So I tailored it completely. And luckily, the organizing community of the medical students at Makerere accepted and I presented the work. Of course, at that time now I was getting very excited. Then my next conference now was actually organized by Nchafatso. That was at Amsun. I remember it was at the NHIF building it was, I think, in 2008.
2008, yes, that's right.
So that time I wrote, I think I had written something on it was a case report on a patient that I had seen during my junior clerkship with dilated cardiomyopathy. And so that was the patient I actually presented at during that conference. And of course, that's when I met very amazing colleagues, likes of Dr. Mogire, who is now a physician in the United States. I met Dr. Wawira, who is an interventional radiologist practicing in Atlanta. So I made a very good network of friends. Now, based on those two papers, why I'm building this up is that because this was now the basis for actually securing my first travel grant, which was in 2009. So in 2009, there was a website. It's called Keystone Symposia, and they normally have what they call the Global Health Travel Award Series. So there was a conference that was being organized, and it was going to be held at the Arusha International Conference Center. And this conference, the Global Health Travel Award Series, was actually being funded by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. And the conference was really focused on TB and AIDS. And so, in fact, this one was actually being, this opportunity, I learned about it through my friend Judy Wawira, whom I've talked about as an interventional radiologist in the US. That time she was a fourth-year medical student at Moi. So when we met up, she told me about this opportunity, and that will be the next learning opportunity. So really try as much as possible. The friends you have, your colleagues in medical school, try and keep contact with them as much as possible and network with them and share opportunities, because you do not know what you can actually learn from each other. So I learned about this conference, and then that was the first time I was now learning how to actually write a travel grant, really. And Nchafatso was going through the process of how to write a grant, and it actually follows the same process, really. Writing, of course, what is motivating you to go for this conference, what are the previous papers you've ever presented at this conference? I mean, at previous conferences. Are you submitting an abstract for this conference? And how does it relate to what you're going to be presenting? So that was now for this particular conference. So I wrote, it was about, I think about 4 pages, just writing my motivation to attending this conference. And then for the segment where they talked about previous presentations at conferences, I actually indicated the two presentations, the seriousness of the common cold that I did in Makerere, and the dilated cardiomyopathy case report that I did at the University of Nairobi under AMSUN. And that is what I submitted. And then I now started the waiting. And after 2 months, the email came back that I've been accepted to go for the conference, and it was being fully funded with airfare between the home country, that was Entebbe International Airport, and the Kilimanjaro Airport in Arusha. And I can tell you, I mean, for some of you who've actually secured grants, I don't know about you, Nchafatso, but I remember for me when I got that first grant, I remember I didn't sleep because first of all, I'd never even been on an airplane. So you can imagine the excitement that really came with it. But I think the actual excitement that came up was when I actually landed in Arusha for this conference, because that time I was meeting with professors from Harvard, I was meeting with professors from Johns Hopkins, and that time I'd just written case reports of some patients I'd met during my junior clerkship. And that will be the other opportunity. I know with RePub, this is some of the things that we are trying to focus on, where medical students should be publishing their case reports. And so that is something that it may look as a joke, but please take it very seriously, because you do not know in life where it actually takes you. It can take you very, very far. And so that is where now my first travel grant came in. And of course, one of the things is that when you're successful in one thing, you want to really push in. You know, sometimes you do not want to, when you do something and you keep flopping very many times, sometimes that motivation disappears. But when you secure one thing, like when you secure one grant, you're actually motivated to keep writing more grants, or you keep motivated in looking for additional opportunities. And that is exactly what happened for me. So that was my first travel grant. Which I went and I must tell you that that conference really opened up my eyes and gave me a whole world view of what actually happens in some of these international conferences. And literally that's what actually encouraged me to pursue a career in infectious disease. So that was in 2009. Then in 2011, there was the International AIDS Society Conference. That was the AIDS, IAS 2011. And in that year, it was the conference was in Rome, in Italy. And normally for these conferences, they advertise very early. In fact, they normally advertise about 6 to 8 months in advance, so that it gives people time to submit their abstracts, and it makes people to really submit abstracts in advance and allow vetting and all that. And the good thing with some of these conferences, you really don't have to be, what I came to realize, you don't have to be a doctor. You just need to have a sound abstract. You should have done something very simple and then submit it for the conference. Now, in 2010, one of my professors within the Department of Internal Medicine had a study that was going on, and it was really looking at issues of nutritional assessments among orphans and vulnerable children. Among AIDS, of people who've been infected by HIV/AIDS, and that was in the western part of Uganda. And so he gave us what is called a bit of a locum, so to speak, to help him in collecting data out in the field. And so, he used to call me one of his active students, so I was recruited into that study. And so we went out into the field and started collecting a lot of this data. And then bringing it back for his research assistants to key in the data into certain software. But as I was seeing him keying in some of this data, he was discarding a lot of the questionnaires. So he was inputting a bit of the data, but the rest of the data he was literally discarding them. So I was actually asking him, so I actually asked him, why are you discarding a lot of this data? Then he was like, it does not meet my research objectives. So I was like, instead of tearing them up, could you please help me with these questionnaires? So he was very gracious and he helped me with the questionnaires. Then I went and slept with them in my dormitory. And that night I actually slept because I was like, is there something I can derive out of this, the data that he's discarding? Is there something that I can derive out of it? So for him, he was focused a lot with the CD4 counts. He was focused a lot with the way, I mean, with the you know, the vitamin A levels in the blood and all that. But for me, I was more content with the very simple things, you know, the weight, the height, the mid upper arm circumference. I think for me, I was more interested in those very basic things. For each was that did not meet his research objectives. And so when I looked at it, one of the questions I asked myself is that could I write something on the anthropometric characteristics of AIDS-affected orphans and vulnerable children in Western Uganda? And that became my research question. And so what I did that whole month was literally just writing an abstract on anthropometric assessment. I actually took a week just to learn how to work with SPSS, how to do data analysis. I had a very good teacher who taught me a lot of the epidemiology and biostatistics. So he just gave me tips on how to do very basic analysis. And that was the analysis that I did, and I submitted an abstract for AIDS 2011. Of course, at that time when I was submitting it, I submitted it as a complete joke. And even my lecturer and even my professor said, this one don't expect much, but at least it gives you experience to actually submit an abstract. And shock on me, my abstract was accepted and I got a full travel grant to travel to Italy. You can imagine that it was the talk of the town at KIU. It was really the talk of the town that a fourth year, that time I was a fifth year medical student, that a fifth year medical student has secured a travel grant. Even my lecturers themselves could not sink in, because some of them have actually never gotten these grants. So when I traveled to Rome, I mean, I can tell you after that, now my field just opened up. It just opened up. And from then to date, nowadays, I don't write as much travel grants because nowadays, much of my travel is based on invitations. So that was, I literally, my last travel grant, I think, was in 2017 when I was finishing up my infectious disease subspecialty training. But you can see that during the entire process, that simple topic on the seriousness of the common cold alone made a huge difference towards the path that I literally took. So one of the things that will literally encourage you is that sometimes don't think about very fancy or very complicated topics, and don't think about very complicated things. Start from wherever you are. Just start with the very simple, very basic things. You know, some things may look very, very it may not look very enticing or very exciting for some people, but for some others, that could probably just be the launching pad to your career. And of course, after the travel grant, then when I went into training in internal medicine, now when I was now going for my Master of Science in Public Health in Tropical Medicine, the Belgian government was actually awarding scholarships. And so at that time, I also had no experience with applying for scholarships for such programs. But one of the parts where they actually, during the applying for that training scholarship, was actually what are some of the presentations you've made and what are some of the publications you've done. At least by that time, I'd had one publication, but of course, in terms of presentation, the seriousness of the common cold in East Africa had to appear on the list. And luckily, I got the scholarship. But during that entire period, there were also a huge number of rejections. It was not that I was literally just securing grants here and there. I mean, for every 2-3 grants that you've secured, there were like another 30 that had been rejected. So those are things that you should really be, anticipate as you move along. And so after that, literally, I now joined the Nchafatso's League of now applying for grants for really undertaking clinical research. And right now, one of the grants that I'm running is really setting up a clinical trials unit in Eldoret at the Fountain Healthcare Hospital. For some of you who are at Moi University or who are within Eldoret, you're highly welcome to visit my clinical trials unit. Of course, when the COVID-19 issue subsides and I'm back in Eldoret at some point. So really, to cut the long story short, one of the things that I would really want to belabor is it has really been eloquently captured by Nchafatso. One of the things is that just start simple. That's number one. Number two, really start with the very basics and really try as much as possible to write on anything that you see exciting, because there are very many exciting things out there in medicine, and nothing you should not really neglect anything. Anything that really you find exciting, just jump on it and make a move on it. And then in addition to what the links that Nchafatso has presented, or some of the opportunities that Nchafatso has actually highlighted, I happen to be a global assessor for the Royal Society of Tropical Medicine and Hygiene based in the United Kingdom. And within that program, we've actually set up what we call the Small Grant Scheme. And the Small Grant Scheme is really a grant scheme where people who are just trying to start out in research, we try to allocate them some small amount of funding. It's not a lot, just about, I mean, it's about a maximum of £5,000, which I think in Kenya should be equivalent to about 500,000 to 600,000 Kenya shillings. Well, of course, it may look like a lot of money for medical students. In research, that's really a drop in the ocean. But that is good money to get someone started out in the research field. I know for the last grant scheme that we've reviewed, it was very exciting to see a number of medical students applying. Of course, the medical students were all based in the UK. There were very few coming from the sub-Saharan African world, and that's one grant that I would really encourage people to start applying for. And of course, you need to have very good mentorship with you. You need to look for mentors who are really grounded and really who accept the philosophy of undertaking research, because some lecturers, some few lecturers may be interested in research, but the huge majority may just be interested in clinical practice and running their private practices, but they may not really be involved in research. And so they may not be good mentors. Some of the mentors that you may require may not even be within the university. They actually may be outside. They may be based in the Cambridge Wellcome Trust. They may be based in private practice. They may not necessarily be within the university setting. So those are people you need to get in touch with, because what normally happens is that when some of us are reviewing these grants within the Royal Society, we also need to look for what some of your mentors have written, where they're recommending you actually for that grant. And it could be something as simple as looking at acceptance of vaccinations, something as simple as if you did a medical camp and you did diabetes screening, what did you find? Or if you're actually setting up a diabetes screening program within, say, SCORE, I don't know, they call it SCORE or something. Those are things that can actually be funded under our program, because one of the biggest things is you just want to get your name on a grant, on a grant, and actually builds your knowledge to actually now bid for bigger grants. So the Royal Society of Tropical Medicine and Hygiene small grant scheme is another scheme that would be interesting to some of you who may want to get into research in terms of tropical medicine and global health, as well as the Keystone Symposia Global Health Travel Award Series. That is one thing that we'll also be interested in looking into. Maybe at the end of this session, when I get back to Nairobi, I'll be able to send you links of some of these programs when I'm a bit settled. I hope I've not spoken too much, and I think after that, I'll end it at that. Thank you very much.
Oh, nice, thanks.
Thank you.
That was good.
Thank you both for such brilliant presentations, which are so relatable and yeah, just so applicable to us. I am so thankful and grateful to Dr. Yonga for so many aspects he brought up. The small things are helpful. I mean, we might consider things as being small, but looking at epidemiological factors and mastering the basis is always key in our scientific growth. So I have done various research projects, but now I regret so much just hearing both of you. But I encourage others to take up the mantle, follow the guidance given, the resources mentioned. We will send them and forward them on email or even the chat. Use the mentors around you, submit what you can, and you never know, you just never know. I will now hand over to Nikita. she will tackle the Q&A section, and I'll just jump in between in case. Okay, Nikita.
Thank you very much, Chana. And thank you so much to Dr. Obonyo and Dr. Yonga for taking your time to talk to us today. You brought out things that we think are simple, but are very important in the beginning of our journey. Like not wanting to do your concept paper, to go through with it because it seems too simple. Just do it, even if it's on the Common Cold. The importance of having a role model like the lecturer who opened your eyes to the availability of opportunities for undergraduates in research. The importance of having exposure to these opportunities, which we really appreciate that you're telling us about them today. So thank you. We have a few questions that have been raised in the chat box. I can see that you've answered, but for the sake of people who are on our Facebook Live, and
I can talk about it, yeah.
Okay, sawa. So
the question, you could read it out and then.
Sawa. So the first question is the Cambry Welcome Trust. Is it limited to Kenyans alone?
Yes, the answer to that is yes and no as well. So the yes bit is, it depends with the level at which you're talking about. So the example that I put up in the slides had a good number of different levels of training. You know, it had medical electives, postgraduate diploma, master's, doctorate, and then postdoctorate. So from memory, and I did say in the response here that it's best to just check. This thing keeps getting updated every so often, and it's very dependent on the level of funding. But I think from memory, the lower levels of training, that was the medical elective and postgraduate diploma, were applicable only for Kenyan residents. But as you go to the higher levels, it's open to all Africans really. And it sometimes even goes beyond Africa. We have people who are doing their doctorate and postdoctorate studies from the UK and mainly here, and people who've come from other different universities. So it's not really limited to Kenyans, but it depends really with what level, yeah.
All right. Very well explained, but for further information, do well to check the website. We have questions here for Dr. Yonga. One is, did you collect data for your conferences at home?
Well, that's a good question. So for the seriousness of the Common Cold, that data was collected in a library, just from a textbook, literally. I just went and read and pretty much just documented what I saw in the textbook. So it was really not field collected data. I think the only field collected data that I've ever done was for the AIDS conference that was in Rome. And that was, of course, based on data for my, for a bit of data that was for my professor, for my mentor and supervisor at that particular time. So he's the one who actually accorded me that data. But as time went along, I started doing a bit more field work. And then for people who, I don't know about the University of Nairobi, but I know for Moi University and us who trained in Uganda, during your undergraduate, you actually had to do research. I think they call it COBS. I don't know whether it still exists, but there's what they used to call COBS. Yes. So that COBS, there's a lot of data is collected normally in the field, and some of that data you may find it to be not very useful, but for a medical student, that is very rich data that you can actually abstract. So the main thing will probably just to maybe formulate a research question or a research topic, because that is where probably your journey begins. Then after you formulated your research question, you can actually use the data that you collected in the field during these research programs to actually now come up with a good abstract or a good research paper that can actually be acceptable for presentation at some of these international conferences. Because some of these international conferences, what people really look for is data from from this part of the world. Because not a lot is known about some of the disease burden that we have in this side of the world. So when you present some of this work, especially as a medical student, it's normally very encouraging for some of these seasoned guys who are out there in the field, because one of the things you'll realize is that, especially as a medical student, it's normally very encouraging for some of these seasoned guys who are out there in the field, because one of the things you'll realize is that, especially as a medical student, it's normally very encouraging for some of these seasoned guys who are out there in the field, because one of the things you'll realize is that in terms of people who present research or people who are interested in research, I can tell you for a fact, out of 100 doctors, only 5% of them actually do research. So when people see doctors from this side of the world presenting research at some of these international conferences, these people become very motivated to actually invite you for more conferences and to actually put in money through various research programs to actually motivate people in undertaking research. So to cut the long story short, data can be collected from anywhere. You can collect it in a library somewhere, just citing your own opinion on something like what I did for the Common Cold, or you can actually get into the field and collect research and actually collect data. But I think for medical students, the low-hanging fruits are those COBS programs that we normally go out for. I think for us, I think we went into the field, I think 3 times. I don't know for Moe how many times you go out for COBS, but during those 3 times, it's very easy for you to collect quite some rich data for that you can actually use later on for presentation.
All right, thank you very much. The next question again is to Dr. Yonga. When you attended the first conference, since the abstract had not been accepted, did you make a presentation?
No. So what happened is when of course the paper was rejected, so there was no presentation. But I think one of the things when I got to the conference, one of the organizers actually told me is that one of the reasons why they actually waived my registration fee is that they'd seen this and they were like, this guy is a second-year medical student and seems to have been motivated because I think I was the only medical student who had submitted an abstract for that conference. So I think when they were doing their selections of abstracts, they said that they actually put mine aside and they were like, this guy submitted an abstract. It may not have met the caliber, it had not met the standards for what they were anticipating for presentation, but that initiative that had been shown for actually submitting an abstract is what actually made them invite me to actually just go and sit and see what actually happened in a conference. But of course, just by attending the conference, of course, there was a lot of networking. That's actually the time I actually met this professor, the professor who actually gave me the project when I was in my 5th year. Because in 2nd year, I had not met him, but in my 5th year, he was like, "Oh, I remember you. You're the guy I met in the conference 3 years ago." And so a relationship was actually built up at that particular moment. So at that time, of course, there was no presentation, but the networking was invaluable for sure.
All right, there you have it. You don't. The only benefit of attending a conference is not presentation. There's much more available to you, so apply regardless. And it's true from experience, they get very excited when they see undergraduate medical students applying. It shows a lot of proactivity. People on the other forums, YouTube and Facebook, are asking for the names of the grants and the links. So maybe we could say the names as we try and project our screens, the links on the screen.
Okay. So the first one is called Keystone Symposium. Keystone, that is KEYSTONE. That's Keystone. Then Symposia, SYMPOSIA. Keystone Symposia. So when you type in the Keystone Symposia, when you go to the link for it's called Travel Assist, I think Travel Awards, scholarships. In fact, you go to the link called scholarships. There's something called the Global Health Travel Award Series. So that program is purely for people from I can say Sub-Saharan Africa, Asia, really the developing world, who are interested in attending this conference. And there's normally a series of conferences. I know this year there's one, I think there's one on maternal health, I think somewhere in India. I think there's one again on HIV in the United States sometime next year. So there are normally very many under that program. And the application is pretty straightforward, but you need an abstract for you to be accepted. These things you're not just given free. You have to actually show that there's something you're going to present. So that's the first program. The second one is called the Royal Society of Tropical Medicine and Hygiene. So under this, the Royal Society of Tropical Medicine and Hygiene, when you go to the grants page, there's something that is called the Small Grant Scheme. So it is an initiative between the Royal Society of Tropical Medicine and Hygiene as well as the National Institute of Health Research in the UK. That's the equivalent of the NIH in the US. So there are very many. That one is also grants for people from all over the world. And that one, the good thing with that grant is that we don't discriminate. You could actually be a medical student or you could be a PhD fellow. So we don't discriminate. So the only thing is that you have to prove that you are an upcoming researcher and that your research topic is viable. It really follows the objectives that Nchafatso showed, the smart objectives: specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, time-bound. Yeah, those ones should be demonstrated in your grant. But in terms of whether you are a medical student or a PhD fellow, that does not apply. So that will be also an interesting program for anyone who is interested to look at.
Right. Another one, to both Dr. Yonga and Dr. Obonyo, are there research institutes in Kenya that would take undergraduate medical students for training on research? Unfortunately, medical schools don't put much emphasis on research yet.
So I should probably take that one. The opportunities, the reality of it is that the opportunities are very limited. I would say even on the slide where I projected the thing that showed opportunities for doing medical electives under Cambridge Wellcome Trust, I think they only take 4 students in a year or something of the sort. Part of, probably I should build a bit of background. I know in the first slides I just put from the archives thing that talked about MSAKE, but the background to this is we had actually, as a medical student, we organized 3 different medical student conferences during my time at undergrad, one in 2006, 2008, and then we went to Eldoret in 2009. The reason for doing all that was, well, it was good training, but it was also out of frustration that we weren't seeing much opportunity being provided. And so we decided to create some noise, which is what we always do anyway. When we left school, there was no money. We were the first guys who went ahead and organized strikes in the streets with Dr. Were, the current chair of KMA. So I think that it goes back to a point where in the research world, there'll be lots of frustrations, lots of rejections, but you don't give up. You need to pick yourself up and keep going. What I say in response to the question is the opportunities are definitely there, but extremely competitive and very limited. What I'd throw the challenge back to you is, as a medical student, I know the challenges that we go through, and Paul did talk about some of this. You're always watching over your grades, and you just want to get to the next year, and until you finish. Part of the training at the university, and it's a bit of a shame, our universities put too much emphasis on you getting across. Of course, you need to take care of your academics because that's why you're in there. One of the things I was very fortunate to have done during my university days in Nairobi, at the University of Nairobi, was to take part in a lot of extracurricular activities. We used to go campaigning for the Sonu posts, Upper Kabete, and then plants, and you get to meet a lot of different people, not just interacting with medics. So I took very active part in student politics, campaigner, and I learned quite a lot in that process. So I'd encourage you not to try and think of the box and open to meeting and about a lot of things. I learned quite a lot in terms of organizing conferences. I've now organized conferences at international level, but most of the stuff I learned was on the job when you were doing this conference organization when a third year, second year medical student back in the University of Nairobi. The other thing that doing conferences as students does is provokes the people who are up there, you know. You invite the principal to open up a conference, and then tomorrow you go back and tell him, now we need to set up a research agenda now that you've opened up this conference. And Paul has talked quite a bit about the role of networking. It's quite important as well, interacting with your peers, not just across in different universities across the country. The reason we formed MSAKE was, at the time there were only 2 medical schools in the country, but KU was opening up, and I think Egerton was just in the works trying to open up. And we sat down and decided eventually we'll need a body that brings all these medical students from all these different institutions together. And this is what research is about, not waiting for somebody to point the direction for you. Research is about you taking the lead. I mean, no one told us, you guys go and form MSAKE. We just sat up in a room in Hall 6, was it, or blocks or somewhere, and decided, let's form this organization. We sat down, divided the work, wrote up that constitution, and then now started looking for money to get the institution started. Of course, again, what that slide just doesn't show you is how many no's we encountered along the way. People saying, no, we can't. You guys are just a bunch of jokers and that kind of thing. We persisted in these kinds of things. And in 2009, again, I remember at the conference, we eventually managed to get the minister actually of health or medical services, it was called at that time, to come and open our students conference in Eldoret. That time it was Professor Yonga. And during that time, again, we also had a discussion around, you know, the salaries that they were paying doctors, because we were already looking ahead. We said, once we leave medical school, we will be getting into this job market, and we are seeing our colleagues doing internship are just complaining the whole time. And we started a conversation that unfortunately didn't end very well in the boardroom and led us to the streets in 2011. But we had told the minister that if you don't do something, we'll be in the streets, and we met in the streets in 2011. It's just a story for another day. But I really want to challenge. A lot of us think of us as medical students as being helpless, or, you know, the system. I can't do anything in this system. The current Minister for Education was our Vice Chancellor when we were organizing these student conferences. And I remember we tried to get appointments at the main campus with the Vice Chancellor. You can imagine how difficult initially it was to just say, oh, you want an appointment to do what? To ask for money to organize a students conference. And so we tried to go through the formal route, the dean, the principal of the college, to book an appointment for us. And we eventually managed to get an appointment in a way that I wouldn't quite recommend any of you to do, but we walked to the offices in main campus and then went to the secretaries and said, we want to see the Vice Chancellor. And, you know, we were asked us who or what. And we said, well, we are students in the university and we want to talk to the Vice Chancellor. We're trying to organize a medical conference. And when they said we need to go back to the university and get an appointment and all, and we said, well, if anything happens in the university after this, don't blame us. We don't say we didn't come to warn you about it. And before we even got downstairs, we were called back and we were ushered into a boardroom, and then we presented our case. And then that's how we ended up getting some 300,000 from the university. And again, the other thing, when you're doing these organizations, you need to be very strategic in how you're asking for things. You see, we asked the university for 300,000 shillings. It's almost impossible for the university to fork 300,000 shillings and give you cash. But when you're organizing a conference, you itemize your budget. And this is also with your grant applications. You'll need food, you'll need accommodation. And these are things the university has. It has accommodation, it has catering at CCC. So all we ask for is the Vice Chancellor to allocate money to the tune of 300,000 towards those things, and not give us a check of 300,000 to go and buy food from somewhere else. So being very strategic in what you're asking for is also really important. And funding doesn't just come in form of cash. In fact, in this research world, if someone supports you in kind, they probably help you a lot more than giving you money. If they give you a letter and saying, yes, I know this guy can deliver on, when he says he'll deliver, that goes a much longer way in building your career than someone just giving you some 10,000 shillings to go and start out. So I'm not sure I've really answered the question, and I've talked quite a bit and gone round about the opportunities for undergraduate medical there. They're very, I'm glad Paul has in the call invited medication for some of you to visit the Fountain Healthcare Tropical Medicine Institute is setting up. These are the things you need to listen very carefully and take advantage of. If you're in Moi University, he said after COVID, so don't go there today or tomorrow, but don't leave Eldoret before you've visited and seen what Paul is doing out there. If you get the chance to come for medical electives at the Kemri Welcome Trust, look us out. We're happy to guide you through this process. Yeah, it's the bit that can't be underestimated or can't be said any differently is that research is not easy. It's a tough job, and you can imagine going through a lot of rejections. It's very easy to give up along the way. It needs you to pick yourself up and keep moving.
All right. So in essence, what I hear you saying is that there are a few programs, but the opportunities are very few. They're limited.
And limited, yes.
And what we can do in response to the limited number of opportunities is that we can come together as students and form our own research-based organizations, if that's the area we're inclined to. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, that's what I'm saying. And I'll just share my screen once again for a little bit to just show you another example of what we did. I mean, this is a letter. We talked to the guys in Tanzania, the medical students in Tanzania. And this is just an example of a letter of, we provoked them. We told them we had done a medical students conference in Kenya. Why isn't there Tanzania one? And they ended up organizing one and inviting us, and just an example of an invitation letter. So form these networks using the Federation of Medical Students, the IFMSA. If you think people are sitting on, gold somewhere on the continent, wachokoze, provoke them, tell them we are going to have we've had conferences in Kenya, we invited you guys, you didn't come. Now it's your turn. Organize a conference, us guys are going to come. I know in this COVID pandemic, things are not going to be very easy with trans-border and such kinds of movements. But to be a good researcher, you need to challenge status quo. That's basically what you need. You need to not sit and wait for things to be handed to you. You need to go out looking and saying, how can we? And this is basically how we live. And this is what actual research is all about. It's a question of saying people are treated in this way in the hospital. Maybe we can do it better. Maybe there'll be fewer deaths if it's done in a different way. And that's what the research is all about.
Maybe you'd be interested to know that we've been doing that for the past couple of years. We've come together as students interested in research and formed different consortia. For instance, we have ReMed, which stands for Research in Medicine.
Yes, I saw that on the opening slide. Yeah.
All the student organizations that have come together to form this webinar series are doing something to the effect of what you're talking about. So we are trying, but I also hear your push for us to be more aggressive in our sourcing for resources with which to run our activities. So for those for whoever asked the question about the availability of research institutes in Kenya, the very formalized ones with a formal curriculum, I think they're very few, but we've come together as students to do something. So you can reach out to any of the organizers if you'd like to find out more about how to join the various forums. So there's ReMed, there is SOHIC, which stands for the Students One Health Innovation Club. There is FAMSA, the Federation of Students Associations. There is MSAKE, where we have our founding members talking to us today. So MSAKE has a research arm. There is the Ubongo Campaign, if you're very interested in neuroscience.
Oh,
So
that's another one. We actually started that in 2004, was it, back in the University of Nairobi. And I still get involved. I was just talking to the current coordinator, who's Koki, about sourcing for funding for the next year's event. And it's all about writing grant applications. So these funding applications are open, and the opportunities that we can, some which we have access to, we can share with you. But having said that, again, it's always just mindful that in research, I say the pot of money is not big, and there's no free lunch. You'll have to apply for it, compete with whoever else is out there. Some will win, some will lose, but it's how we live.
All right. So would you, basically, it really needs you to be proactive if you're going to dive into the field of medical research as an African undergraduate student. There are efforts from your fellow colleagues, but you also need to put in quite some effort in terms of pushing yourself to get the process started.
The other thing I might add to that is, this is now going back to the bits on mentorship.
Yes.
To find a mentor, one of the things that people get wrong is, before you approach someone for mentorship, it's good to understand their research portfolio, do your homework. So if someone is doing their research, for example, on the kidney, and you're interested on research in, a totally different system, the liver, they'll probably have a grant, and they'd probably have access to some funding or opportunity for a medical student. But if your interests are not aligned, then that funding is not open to you. So that's the other thing. You need to align, as you're looking out for a mentor, you need to be keen to align what your research interests are to what that mentor is doing. Because like I said, the funding that mentor would probably have, they also have to make a justification for spending it on a travel support for a medical student. And so if it's someone who's just not interested in that field of research, it makes it very difficult to justify spending money. So the thing is, a lot of the learning or the techniques in research are very transferable, and you can learn research methods in neuroscience. They're transferable across to nephrology, cardiology, but the actual project or the actual interest in the project needs to be very well aligned to who your mentor is. And that way you'll find it's much easier to get access to opportunities, as opposed to you saying, I did something that is very different, or I'm interested in something that is very different from what you do on a daily basis, but I still want you to spend money on me. Yeah.
Right. Our final question for the session, we have, what has, to both Dr. Yonga and Dr. Obonyo, maybe Dr. Yonga can start us off. What has your greatest motivation been that led you to pursue research?
Well, I think for me it's been more of I think it's been more of really trying to disrupt the status quo, just as Nchafatso said, really making sure that you break off from the routine. You'll find that as you start medical practice, this issue of just going into the ward, seeing patients, going into clinics, seeing patients, for those who have been surgeons going to theater, then retiring back to the house. That routine can get very monotonous and very boring. But you'll find like what Nchafatso is doing, like every day, maybe when he's doing echoes on kids, every echo has a different story, or every project comes when he does his research program, certain new questions tend to come up. So I think it is just that diversity and that the differences that you see on a daily basis. If for me as a person, for me as Paul Yonga, I think for me what motivated me most was initially was the material thing, because as I mentioned earlier, I grew up in a family where we already had a doctor in the family who was already doing a lot of research. Of course, at that time, it was not very clear, but when I joined medical school, it now started becoming very apparent for what he was doing. And so when I just saw what he was doing sitting on his computer, doing analysis, bringing in like his friends from abroad who he was collaborating with, and we'll sit at the dinner table and then they'll be discussing what each one of them were doing. Of course, during that time, I was still quite naive. But I said as I progressed through medical school and as I started advancing through medical school and getting into medical practice, a lot of these things started making sense. And Nchafatso will agree with me that there are not very many medical researchers out there. The ones who are out there are very few, and those few are very motivated. And when the moment they take you under their wing, they'll want to offload all of their knowledge and expertise onto you. I don't know whether some of you, some of our attendees, some participants here are from Uganda, and because for those from Makerere University, there are people. There's a professor called Professor Eli Katabira. In fact, that is the guy who literally dragged me into research, because he started off as a neurologist but veered off into HIV/AIDS. That guy literally held my hand through the entire process. And then for those who are at Moi University, now I think he's retired. The person who mentored me at Moi University was Professor Joe Mamlin. Professor Joe Mamlin actually plucked me out when I was an intern in his department in internal medicine at the Nyayo ward, because he saw I was very interested in interacting with HIV-infected patients. And I think a lot of my research career has been built based on HIV medicine. So it's really been trying to answer very unanswered or very intriguing research questions, why some patients are not improving despite treatment, why some patients are dying. Because you'll find that it will be a simple topic such as why are some HIV patients dying, why are some not dying? That already is a research question. And so you try and look for ways of answering that research question. It was some of those intriguing factors, which when you're in clinical practice may just look like something normal. But to some of us, it may not be very clear why some things are happening and some things are not happening. And so you venture out into research to do it. And some of these researches may not even take as much money. Some people anticipate that all your research has to be funded based on grants on outside funding. I can tell you for a fact that for me, a lot of the research that I did in my earlier years were funded on my pocket money. I used to save, I think, as simple as, even 500 shillings just to print out questionnaires. Now you can even save that money, because now there are even mobile software such as ODK to input some of this data. So you don't even need budgets for questionnaires. So that's how some of us started. I don't know how Nchafatso started, but I know some of us, those are some of the things we didn't. There was nothing like grants. I mean, I didn't even know what a grant was. So a lot of the initial researches that I started were based on some of my savings and a bit of the pocket money to try and see how to get some of these things going. So sometimes you may as you move along, you may not even depend on that initial grant. You may actually have to put in your own resources. Then as you move along, and then when people see your motivation, then they can put in their own money. They can put in their own money. So it's really the passion and the attitude towards answering pressing healthcare problems. I think for me, that's the biggest motivation so far.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. Actually, I might just pick it up from there, and something that I must say as well, just in passing, that from even the beginnings of it, there was quite a bit of sacrifice that we made to just, like Paul says, from our own pocket money. I'll just give you an example of what you see today as KMPDU, that is the Doctors Union. And the history of KMPDU, we started it in a room in Block B somewhere in Kenyatta. at the hostels, and we sat down, and you know, people put in money that they were, instead of eating lunch, you save that money for lunch. And then we eventually had enough money to go and hire a venue at YMCA. And we hired some PA equipment and brought together doctors out of our own pockets. I mean, and today when we look at KMPDU into the thing it has grown, and the change it is causing in society, we feel very proud and happy. And it doesn't really, you know, it's priceless what it's doing for the doctor fraternity in the country compared to that 200 shillings that I missed lunch to put in so that we could have a doctors union. I mean, you can't really compare some of these things. So and even along the way of building my career, I've had to make some opportunity costs, forego some things to invest in self-development. I can't really underestimate or fail to talk about the need for you to self-develop. Those links I put up on the slide for some ethics courses, science communication courses, those things are really important when you're talking about research and in this grant space, that some of it will not come cheap, but it's all about the passion, as Paul says. What drove me to research? Again, the same thing, just the passion. Like I've told you, I think I've gone through Ubongo Campaign, which we started, MSAKE, which we started, the Doctors Union, which we started. If you're not content with the status quo, then you're primed to be a good researcher. You're asking the right questions and looking for answers where people would naturally tend to be shy away from. I'm naturally a curious person. And then when I got to Chiromo, I happened to work with a guy who those of you in the University of Nairobi would know, called Professor Patel, who is a guy who really taught me how to think as a researcher. I know some people might find him a bit harsh, but that is how the research world is. He gives you space to think and defend whatever ideas you believe in, because that is exactly what writing up a grant is. You'll say, I want money to do ABCD, and people will ask you, why should you give you money? Why is ABCD important? And you should be able to defend it, because if you can't, then you'll never get a grant. You'll never get a grant. You'll never get funded. So I think I was driven to it. I mean, unlike Yonga, I didn't have any doctors or people to motivate me to get into medicine. I just wanted to do medicine myself. But along the way, I also developed interest in, research by wanting to find out what works, what doesn't, and why. That's probably a more important question. And there's a lot of research going on out there. I mean, if you do a PubMed search, there's loads of things. So research is not just thinking about discovering a new molecule that will cure diabetes or stop hypertension. It's also about looking for ways of doing things more efficiently from what is happening, looking for ways of improving what is currently happening to make it better, slightly better. So I know when most people think about research, they tend to think of, oh, will I discover this new wonder drug that will finish COVID from the world? Well, it would be really nice and you'll be a millionaire if you do that. But research is also about just looking at what is happening today. How can it be modified? How can it be made better? Just being uncomfortable with status quo, basically. And I guess it's not just research, it makes you even a better person if you're self-critical and introspect and ask questions.
I always go back to a quote by Dr. Seuss. I don't know how many people in our audience are fans, but he said something along the lines of, if someone like you doesn't care a whole lot, nothing's going to change. So be disruptive.
Oh, it takes, how many people does it take to change the world? Just need one madman to say, this is wrong, and persist until, we started KMPDU 2009 when we were forming it. It got registered in 2011. So it was 2 years of doors being closed on us and being told you are a cadre that cannot be unionized. And the moment they gave us that registration, we were out in the streets. The first strike was in 2011, and we probably knew what we were looking for, but it will require a lot of endurance to sustain the journey in research and perseverance.
All right. So that was the final question that we'll be taking today. The rest of the questions seem to center around topics that we'll cover in subsequent webinars. I can see there was a question about ethical considerations in research. There was a question about publications, maybe how to go about the publication process. Maybe I can say something small on that before we wind up. While it can be quite tricky, finding an established institution which would guide you through the process of doing your research study and then publishing your paper. Some of us have found that it would be good to put out a publication, to put out a document that would serve as a guide to those of you in the audience who want to, who have written, but don't know how to get to the point where you're publishing your work. So there's a joint publication between ReMed, which stands for Research in Medicine, and FAMSA, the Standing Committee on Publications. It's going to be about how to convert your thesis to a manuscript for publication. Look out for it in the near future. You can reach out to anyone from ReMed or SCOPUB for FAMSA SCOPUB for further information on the same. One more comment has come in. There's a lot of gratitude in the comment section, Dr. Yonga and Dr. Obonyo. I hope you can see people thanking you.
Oh, no, thanks a lot. Someone was asking us for contacts. I did put our emails there. We're open to discussion. And it's usually a conversation. Even with the grant applications, you'll realize when you apply for grant funding, you're not given a pot of money and then you go away for 3 years and then come back and say, sorry, I didn't do what I was supposed to do. It's a conversation with the funder. It's an ongoing conversation. They'll give you 10% to start you off. Then they add you 25%, and they put what is called milestones along the way. Mm-hmm. So you report back that you've achieved milestone A, B, C. Then they release the next batch of money. So it's not really a one-off, like they give you a pot of money to go away. It's an ongoing conversation, and this is what research is all about. I learn from you, you learn from me. And as Paul said, there is no grant that is too small to start. I think what I didn't say was how I actually started out. I got I think $100 grant from a writing competition, which just started me off for my career, which was, don't look at the size of pot. So you get something that can go into your CV, and that makes a big difference. That's the point Paul was trying to.
All right. I think with that we can. We're going to project a QR code that leads us to the post-webinar form, so we can get feedback from the audience on points of improvement, because we still have another 3 or 4 webinars to go. We want the sessions to be as smooth as possible for everyone involved. So there it is. Please remember to fill in the survey form, and you're welcome to our next webinar a week from now on Thursday. I've forgotten the date on the calendar. Let me check.
Okay. So yeah, someone else was supposed to give the vote of thanks, but I can step in. So before I give that, I just wanted to say that there are different opportunities, including SCORE, which is the Standing Committee for Research Exchange. If you want to pursue a research nationally or internationally, even as you know, just someone to learn the skills, just as an assistant, there are subsidized fees that help with this. And depending on the research tutor, they can actually, if they have provision to give you a travel grant or a research grant, you can look into that. So it's recommended that you have a research project and you have some background, so that supplements that push for you. But with that to say, I just want to really thank Dr. Obonyo and Dr. Yonga. Like, I'm just lost for words. Thank you so much for your time and brilliant insight. Dr. Yonga has also been doing this on the move, so I can imagine just how, yeah, we just appreciate that so much. We also thank you for the brilliant work and impact you've had on health and our lives, indirectly and directly now. Very inspiring and helpful. And these presentations will be recorded, so anyone out who missed them, even if anyone wants to reflect back on them, you can always see them on the YouTube channel. I just wish you guys the best and success in any of your endeavors, and just Godspeed with that. Thank you for all the organizing committees for all the work behind the scenes, this platform and even this opportunity. Like, look forward to having more of these in the consequent weeks and to build this this project that we're having to help students with research. And finally, thank you all for joining in. Like, this wouldn't be possible without an audience. We would just be talking to maybe 2 people, which is fine, but thank you for all joining in. Yeah, feel free to fill in the post-survey form so that we learn and we improve the subsequent webinars, and question everything in your scientific realm. You never know what you might figure out and help in doing so. And never take this time for granted. Do as much work as you can so that when we resume at least partial normalcy, you can pursue some of these. So all the best with your research work, and thank you all.
Thanks so much, and goodbye. Yeah.
Goodbye.
Thank you, and all the best.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Yeah, all the best to you guys, and just get in touch if you need to. We might not have all the answers, but at least we can point you in whatever, and we'll try and be as helpful wherever we can be. We for sure will not have all the answers. That's, yeah.
I have actually a follow-up question, and I think I will contact you guys.
Yeah, please do. Okay,
But
bye. Thank you.
Bye. Okay, bye everyone. Have a nice afternoon. See you all next week on Thursday, the 16th of July.
Thank you.